500 to 600 salaried IT careers erased in a 15-minute virtual meeting, a scripted HR statement, then immediate loss of system access. Notifications begin May 11, 2026, cutting through teams in Austin and Warren, reaching globally. The next day, shares are reported down about 3.9%. This is the thesis, not a routine layoff cycle, a skills swap. GM says it is transforming IT, trimming cost, reallocating talent toward AI and software-defined priorities. In practice, legacy white-collar roles disappear, while new technical roles remain open in AI, autonomous systems, and motorsports. The old bargain, loyal tenure exchanged for institutional security, gives way to an operating model that treats professional identity as reconfigurable code. But if this restructuring feels sudden, what decision made it inevitable before the first 15-minute call ever began? Rewind to early 2023. GM is not signaling retreat, it is signaling redesign. With roughly 68,000 salaried employees globally, including about 47,000 in the United States, leadership introduces a voluntary separation path that presents itself as disciplined, humane, and optional. The stated logic is financial and strategic at the same time. Lower fixed cost, protect flexibility, and redirect resources towards software-defined competition. Internal framing treats the move as a controlled release of legacy structure, not an emergency response. In that framing, people are not only labor expense, they are capital allocation choices inside a technology race. The accounting architecture matters as much as the headcount architecture. The plan projected large annualized savings by 2024, with a meaningful share expected earlier, while separation costs were positioned as special pre-tax items to be absorbed up front, rather than left to bleed through future quarters. Additional pension-related non-cash impacts were also anticipated under that design. On paper, this is balance sheet cleansing. Take the pain in a defined window, then present a leaner operating profile to investors. It reads like prudence. It sounds like discipline. But the post-mortem view is harsher. The voluntary phase may have reduced friction, yet it also normalized the idea that white-collar capacity could be recompiled around new technical priorities. That is the blind spot. A soft entry cost program can become permission for a harder system rewrite. And before Wall Street can validate the strategy, one question remains. What happens when voluntary exits no longer deliver the speed the model demands? Profitability arrives not as a recovery story, but as evidence. GM reports quarterly revenue of $43.62 billion, above expectations, and earnings per share beat consensus by a wide margin. Analysts do not read this as instability. They read it as execution. Costs controlled, guidance defended, and a software transition still financed by a very large industrial base. Sentiment stays constructive, with a moderate buy posture and targets that reflect confidence in management's cost discipline and EV positioning. One analyst update even lifts a forward quarterly EPS view, reinforcing the same message. The machine is working. That is the critical inflection. These results do not pause restructuring, they validate it. When performance clears the bar, labor decisions are recoded as operating efficiency, not distress. In that logic, hundreds of salaried IT removals are framed as architecture, not rupture. Capacity shifted away from legacy workflows and toward AI-aligned, software-defined priorities. The immediate share reaction can still turn negative, even dropping around 3.9% in near-term trading. But that fluctuation does not erase the deeper signal investors track: whether leadership can keep margins resilient while redesigning the org chart. This is the apex of corporate rationale, the before image of a system that appears disciplined enough to cut without apology. And once profitability becomes proof, headcount stops being treated as a social contract. It becomes a variable in code. The financial logic looks airtight, but what happens when an airtight model meets human institutions that cannot be recompiled at machine speed? This is not a collapse. It is a disassembly. In May 2026, notifications begin reaching approximately 500 to 600 salaried IT employees, and the language reads like a technical specification, not a termination. Transformation, future readiness, reallocation. That framing is deliberate. If failure caused the cuts, accountability points backward. If transformation caused the cuts, accountability points to architecture. GM positions AI as one factor alongside broader restructuring for a software-defined future. So the mechanism is not a single algorithm replacing a single worker. It is a redesign of required competencies across the entire stack, where legacy roles are judged incompatible before individual performance is even argued. Then the execution strips away any remaining fiction of reciprocity. A virtual meeting, 15 minutes, scripted HR messaging, access removed before the click fades. Employees describe a process that feels less like management and more like deprovisioning, the human equivalent of decommissioning a server. At the same time, the organization still carries roughly 80 open IT positions, including AI and autonomous vehicle tracks. That is the paradox at the center of this chapter. Jobs are not disappearing. Job categories are being repriced. A prior round in 2025 already cut more than 200 Canadian dead engineers, signaling this was not an isolated event, but a continuing inventory reset. Talent treated like legacy hardware, depreciated and replaced on a schedule. What breaks here is the social contract between expertise and tenure. These workers are not told they failed. They are told the map changed. In post-mortem terms, this is a targeted skills purge executed under a modernization banner. The severance calls end in minutes. But the institutional aftershock is slower, deeper, and harder to quantify. 600 people learning on a Monday morning that their expertise has an expiration date they were never shown. And here is the question that should unsettle every salaried professional still drawing a paycheck from a legacy automaker. GM had 47,000 white-collar workers in the US as of last year. This round took 600. The architecture is already drawn. When that aftershock reaches the rest of Detroit's office corridors, will anyone hear it coming? The market responds fast and without sentiment. In near-term trading after the IT layoff disclosures, GM shares fall about 3.9%. That move is not a full verdict on strategy, but it is a signal. Investors can read cost action as discipline or as evidence of internal strain. Here, the reaction suggests both readings are competing at once. Management frames the cuts as transformation, a shift toward AI-linked and software-defined priorities. But markets also price transition risk, execution risk, and the possibility that critical knowledge exits faster than replacement capability arrives. The deeper damage is less visible than a daily chart. GM's salaried system is large, around 68,000 globally, with about 47,000 in the United States, and legacy processes still depend on people who understand old platforms, vendor workarounds, and undocumented operating logic. When those people leave, the organization does not just lose payroll cost. It can lose the feedback loops that keep manufacturing and logistics stable under pressure. This is why the aftermath matters beyond one announcement. The current cuts look like an acceleration of a long-running, fixed-cost reset, first normalized through voluntary pathways, then enforced through targeted removals. The voluntary draft becomes the compulsory phase. For Detroit's white-collar class, this is the warning. Employment no longer tracks tenure. It tracks immediate alignment with the next technical stack. Reinvention becomes continuous, and redundancy can become permanent. The question now is not whether companies can execute this model, but what breaks when an entire employment architecture is built to adapt people faster than institutions can absorb the loss. The postmortem is clear now. This was never fundamentally a cost-cutting episode. It is a control failure, a misclassification of risk baked into how corporations value their own people. For years, salaried technical work sat inside a durable cost center, shielded by complexity, tenure, and institutional memory. Then, AI and software-defined mandates reclassified the entire category. In one move, about 500 to 600 IT roles vanish, while dozens of open positions remain, but for an entirely different technical vocabulary. The signal is surgical. Roles are not merely reduced, skill inventories are replaced. That is the skills swap doctrine. Management language calls it transformation, calls it future readiness. The words are clean, the logic is clean, but the hidden fragility sits underneath. Organizations mistake historical competence for future compatibility until the reset is already running. Lesson 2 cuts deeper. The corporate middle in professional IT is no longer buffered by proximity to core systems. It is exposed by it. The very function once seen as indispensable, translating complexity across legacy platforms, becomes the first layer abstracted by AI-enabled tooling and platform consolidation. A previously disclosed fixed cost reduction architecture gives this shift financial permission. Profitable quarters, including $43.62 billion in reported revenue, give it market legitimacy. Even with near-term share pressure around 3.9%, the strategic direction holds. Reallocate, recompose, outrun institutional adaptation. Detroit makes this pattern visible, but it is not Detroit-specific. The disease is corporate. Detroit is just where the X-ray caught it. If longevity inside high-performing firms is now measured by algorithmic compatibility instead of accumulated experience, what is the sustainable career model for white-collar professionals told to keep adapting while the definition of relevance itself keeps moving?